Welcome back, Chapter 23, Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson, Part 2. A little bit different scenery, at least for me today, my friends. I'm sitting in Ithaca, New York on my lunch break, and you'll hear some traffic behind me, so try your best to avoid that. So here we go. Last time we left off with goal number 3, so I'm going to read this to you. Here we go. Chapter 23, Part 2. Goal number 3, investigate if Australian toilets really do flush backward. I totally tried this, but all of the toilets in Australia are low flow, so basically the water just disappears and then comes back. Sorry if you're disappointed. I assure you, you are not alone. But in a way, that's good, because if toilets really flush backwards, you'd get shot in the face with toilet water every time you flushed, like a violent, angry bidet. Also, apparently Australia thought its goal was too ludicrous to take seriously and instead decided to send us to the outback to see more interesting things. We were to be in the outback for several days, which seemed very wild and exciting, until I actually read the outback on the plane ride there and realized that it was basically just rocks in the desert. It looks a lot like West Texas. If West Texas went on for 1 billion miles and you look at all the beer barns and people and replace them with deadly snakes that want to murder you. The only real difference between West Texas and the outback is the pride Australians have in their rocks. And they should be proud. There are enormous rocks in Australia, and we were on our way to see the second largest one in the world, Uluru. U-L-U-R-U. I believe that's how it's pronounced, so that's how I'm going to say it. I saw it as we flew over it towards the airport, which was built specifically to let people fly over it and look at the big rock. I turned to Laura. Hey, there's that big rock. I nodded toward the window. Laura leaned over to see it. Huh, that is a big rock. She nodded somewhat impressedly, the same way you would if you saw a monkey do the Macarena on YouTube. And then she flipped desperately through the guidebook to see if there were any bars in the outback. So now what do we do for the rest of our 3 days here? I shouldn't have doubted Australia, though, because then we looked closer at our itinerary and we found out we'd be doing a lot in the outback. Like looking at other almost as big, but not quite as big as Uluru rocks, or eating while listening to the rocks, and walking around the rocks, and taking a sunrise tour of the rocks, and a separate sunset tour of the rocks, and buying pictures of the rocks. We did not have high hopes for this leg of the journey. I suspected we were being unfair, though, because the guidebooks all said that Uluru was astounding and that the subtle light changes on the rock turned it into a whole new rock each time the sun moved. I assume the people were writing these guidebooks were on LSD, because I once said the exact same thing about biscuits when I was really high. Turns out that the guidebooks were right. Uluru was pretty amazing. It's the second largest monolith in the world, and I didn't ask what a monolith is, but my guess is it's Latin for big-ass rock. Our hiking guide drove us to Uluru from the resort, which was a small cluster of low-end to high-end hotels you could choose to stay in if you wanted to sleep outside and be gnawed at by dingoes. The dingo gnawing wasn't specifically in the hotel brochures, but I think it implied no dingo nibbling here. Probably running tap water on demand, something like that. The small airport, the resort, and some tents were never saw where the only things for hours, so there was no escape. But we found out that our medium-priced hotel was quite lovely and offered a full bar, so we were just fine. Also, the room we were in had an interesting carpet that was supposed to remind us of an ancient red-bottomed creek, but instead, the blood-colored stain running through the brown carpet looked a lot like a murder victim being dragged across the room and thrown off the balcony, but in a pretty way. Oh my, there's pictures. Our guide was a very sweet and knowledgeable woman who was eager to share the cultural magic of Uluru, which is now owned by the Aboriginal people who originally owned it back before the white people showed up and said, "You have no concept of ownership." Lovely. We own all of this now, but never mind that. How are you? Can we escort some of you somewhere else, and treat you like shit for a while? It's a very long and sordid history, but this is now beginning to be rectified, including giving Uluru back and paying the logical indigenous people to let tours take place. But it basically boils down to the same principle around the world, which is that white people suck and should not be allowed to discover anything that's already been discovered by the people who lived there since the world began. On behalf of white people, I'd like to offer an extremely late but complete sincere, I'm so very sorry for our being assholes. We're learning. Also, I've learned a few stories about some of you guys eating some of us in Tasmania, but I can assure you there are no hard feelings. We'd probably eat us too if there was enough money in it. I don't have any pictures of the lovely Aboriginal people I met because they think it's traps for their spirit. And if they're correct, then Facebook is basically creating a living hell, which is really not that surprising now that I say it out loud. Our guide, whom I'll call Jessica because I'm a terrible journalist and I don't write down names, drove us, plus an older couple and a young Danish girl, the short distance to the base of Uluru, where she began explaining that part of the rock we see is just the tip. High five if you giggled there. And that the majority of the rock is still underground. Jessica used a stick to trace it out in the red sand what Uluru actually looked like. The long shaft hidden, rising slowly upward until the tip penetrated the surface. I stared at Laura with wide eyes, and she stared back at me as we realized our guide had totally inadvertently drawn a penis on the ground that all of us were looking at in amazement. I got a quick photo of it, but it doesn't really show up in black and white. Plus, our guide was in the process of stomping it out. But if you'd like a color picture of a young woman stomping on a penis on the ground, I can deliver. Not that you would want that. I'd like to think that no one really wants that. We were sent to explore the desert and find out what might want to murder us. After an hour of the heat, we suspected it was Jessica, who kept pointing out new rocks. It was the same rock. I was no fool, except that I was out in the desert on a forced walk, seeing imaginary snakes in every twig, so all bets were off. I never saw any live snakes, but apparently Australia is lousy with them, and they have so many that even the lizards are snakes. Please note, if you're a lizard, but you don't have legs, you are a snake. That's how snakes work. It's never not snake season in Australia. In Texas, in the winter, we get at least a break from the scorpions when they all seem to disappear. I assume they must be hibernating with bears, which is sort of terrifying because imagine waking up with a cranky bear and dripping with angry scorpions. That would be the worst thing ever, and now that I think about it, it's probably something that totally exists in Australia. Laura and I started our walk around the big rock, and it was quite enjoyable except for the flies, which followed you in hordes, like an angry entourage intent on setting up a house in your nostrils. I just pinched my nose and closed at one point, and I accidentally ate 2 flies. You'd think that would teach the other flies to avoid me, but no, these were stupid. Reckless flies following stupid, reckless tourists. We pretty much belonged together. Uluru was quite cool and a bit mysterious. Laura and I both had heard chanting, which we assumed was piped in, but Jessica assured us all it was in our heads. She suspected we were drunk. We weren't, but we appreciated the suggestion and quickly located the pub. We found out that getting drunk in Australia is referred to as putting on the wobbly boot and getting off your face, while you do the technicolor yawn, which is, I think, the funniest euphemism for vomiting ever. We also learned how to pronounce things in Australian accent. For example, if you say, "Good eye, mate," it sounds like "good day, mate." Also, raise up lights, razor blades. And "du and under," down under. Basically, you just clench your teeth like you have TMJ and drop a lot of R's, hazardly. Honestly, Australia is just wasting a lot of its R's. It's a little ridiculous. Goal number 4. Find out if kangaroos really have 3 vaginas. Did you know that kangaroos have 3 vaginas? Vaginas. Because they totally do, and that's probably why they're always hitting each other. They probably have PMS every damn day of the week, but on the plus side, kangaroos have plenty of places to smuggle things because they also have many holes in their bodies. In fact, they're so full of holes, it's sort of shocking that all the kangaroos don't just leak out. Interestingly, female kangaroos have 3 vaginas, but male kangaroos only have 2-pronged penis. It's like they've started a Darwinian game of one-upmanship and the girls are winning. Fascinating factoid. Kangaroos also drool on themselves to keep cool, because nothing looks cooler than a drooling kangaroo. But that's helpful to know, because you see them drooling at the mouth, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have rabies. It just means they're hot, referring to their temperature, not sexiness. If you find drooling kangaroos sexy, you probably need help. I wanted to ask the Wildlife Sydney Zoo about whether kangaroos actually do have 3 vaginas, but they wouldn't even let me touch their koalas, so I thought a gynecological exam on a kangaroo was probably out of the question. And also, I didn't have my forceps with me. Instead, Laura and I drove into the bush and looked for real wild kangaroos so I could peer up their bums when they bend over. I couldn't see anything through the fur, although one of the kangaroos did get an erection. It was pink and not attractive, at least to me. But then I'm not a kangaroo. Although I did dress like one to put them at ease. Here's a picture of me showing a kangaroo's picture of himself. He was unimpressed, and kangaroos don't understand selfies. Yes, there are pictures. I will show you guys. We also ate kangaroo, which I feel a bit bad about, partially because they're so cute and partially because they taste terrible. Well, maybe not terrible, but they taste a lot like blood, because if served very rare, kangaroo becomes tough as shoe leather. This always seemed a bit strange to me because there were people eating shoe leather. ? How do they know what it tastes like? Why not purse leather or pants leather? I just had a gentleman pull up beside me, opening a whole box of pizza. What a meanie. Anyway, continuing on. Australia is a very large country because you can spend days running around trying to find wild kangaroos so you can see their majesty, and then you eat them on a pizza. Speaking of pizza, an hour later. Bloody, vampire-friendly pizza. People in Australia really seem to like kangaroo meat, but the only time I ever had it, didn't hate it, was when it was served sliced, very thin, and drizzled in something alcoholic. I think I only liked it more then because there was so much less of it than usual. If they'd sliced it into thin that I could read through it, I suspect I'd have liked it even more. And I probably would have even asked for seconds if they just waved a fork of kangaroo juice near my lips. Or maybe not. I'm not much of a foodie. Goal number 5. Boomerang. We had the opportunity to learn to throw spears in the outback, but it was always secluded right after we'd been drinking. Technically, everything was scheduled right after we'd been drinking, but it was the outback. There was not a lot to do other than get drunk. I tried a plastic boomerang that was sitting in a bin outside the gift shop, but it failed to return, and then I realized I'd basically just tossed unpaid merchandise as far as I could throw it. I considered going to get it, but then I was concerned that when I picked it up, it would be considered shoplifting, and it seemed like that would have been a stiffer penalty than throwing merchandise into the desert. So instead, I just went inside the gift shop to see if anyone would say anything to me. No one did. Probably because it happens all the time. You can't just leave boomerangs out in the open and expect people not to throw them. It's like Australian entrapment. I thought about paying for the boomerang, but then I considered that it didn't come back when I threw it, so it was probably broken. If anything, I was doing unpaid boomerang testing. Laura didn't entirely agree and thought perhaps my technique was bad, but she'd been in the bathroom at the time, so she wasn't really allowed to judge. Honestly, I said, boomerangs are made to make people feel inadequate and unloved. They're supposed to come back, but they never do. Boomerangs are like bad, disloyal dogs or hot ex-boyfriends who your mom assures you will return after they realize they've made a terrible mistake in leaving you, but they totally don't. I'm pretty sure boomerangs work, she said. I've seen them on TV, and I've seen a cartoon cat eat an entire pan of lasagna in one bite, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't kill a real-life cat if you force-fed it that much cheese. Trust me, boomerangs don't work unless you throw them up. Laura stared at me. Well, there's your problem. No, I mean in the air. Not vomit them up, I explained. Ah, she nodded. I was wondering how that would help. Everything is a boomerang if you throw it straight up in the air, I explained. No blimps, she countered with surprising speed considering the number of drinks she had. Touché, I replied. I always forgot blimps. Goal number 6. Just get out of the damn house. This sounds absolutely ridiculous. However, leaving my house was the single hardest part of the whole weird trip. For someone who stays home for weeks at a time and struggles to even have a conversation with the UPS guy, saying yes to leaving my safe place was an achievement, as it was worth it. Sometimes you have to force yourself to leave your house, even though every introverted bone in your body wants to succeed and make you into a human jellyfish. SECEDE. Not sure how to say that word, folks. But I pushed through, and it was amazing, and horrifying, and back to amazing, and weird, and baffling, and fantastic. We saw dangerous blowholes, and hopped up with wallabies down the beach, and played in tide pools, and learned Aboriginal dot painting in the outback, and snuggled with camels in the desert. Then we watched 6 Shakespearean actors simultaneously vomit on stage at the Sydney Opera House. It was all on the stage, though. It wasn't only like 300 babies long. And it was good, but I still want to lick David Tennant's face. Got to work on that, England. Australia is in the lead here. And my friends, that is the end of Chapter 23, Part 2. Next up would be Chapter 24. You'll want to stay tuned for this one because Chapter 24 is entitled Voodoo Vagina. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.